The Lighthouse Keeper's Secret. Chapter 1: The Storm. The wind howled across Gull's Rest Island like a living thing, clawing at the weathered shingles of the lighthouse cottage, and rattling the windows in their frames. Eleanor Marsh pressed her face to the glass, watching the angry sea crash against the rocks below. White foam erupted into the darkness, illuminated only by the sweeping beam of the lighthouse that had guided ships safely to harbor for over a century. She had been the keeper here for 3 years now, ever since her grandfather's death, had left the position vacant, and her life in the city had crumbled. The isolation that had initially frightened her had become a comfort, a shield against the world that had taken so much from her. But tonight, something felt different. The radio crackled to life on the kitchen table. Coast Guard to Gull's Rest Light. Come in, Eleanor. She hurried over and lifted the handset. This is Gull's Rest Light. Go ahead, Tom. We've got a distress signal from a small craft about 2 miles southwest of your position. Visibility's near zero out there. Can you confirm your beacon is operational? Eleanor glanced up at the rotating light above. Affirmative. Light's been steady all evening. Good. We can't get a rescue boat out in these conditions, but hopefully they can follow your beam to safety. Keep us posted. Will do. She set down the radio and pulled on her rain slicker. The climb to the lamp room was treacherous in weather like this, but she needed to ensure everything was working perfectly. As she stepped into the howling wind, she thought she saw something in the distance, a faint light bobbing on the waves. Chapter 2: The Stranger. Eleanor woke the next morning to an unusual sound: silence. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline day with air so clean it seemed to sparkle. She made her coffee and stepped onto the lighthouse gallery, scanning the horizon for any sign of the boat from the night before. The beach below was littered with seaweed and debris, but something else caught her eye. A figure sat hunched on the rocks near the old dock, motionless as a piece of driftwood. Her heart racing, Eleanor grabbed her first aid kit and scrambled down the steep path that wound between the granite boulders. The person didn't move as she approached, and for a terrifying moment she thought they might be dead. But as she drew closer, she could see the slight rise and fall of breathing. It was a man, probably in his 40s, with salt and pepper hair plastered to his skull and clothes that had once been expensive, but were now torn and soaked through. His skin was pale with cold, but his pulse was steady. "Sir? Can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, the most startling shade of green she'd ever seen. He looked at her with confusion, then tried to sit up, wincing in pain. "Easy," Eleanor said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're safe. You're on Gull's Rest Island. I'm Eleanor, the lighthouse keeper." He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What's your name?" she asked. The confusion in his eyes deepened. I don't remember." Chapter 3: Questions Without Answers. Eleanor helped the stranger to the cottage, supporting his weight as they climbed the winding path. He moved carefully, favoring his left leg, and she noticed a nasty gash on his forehead that needed attention. In the warm kitchen, she wrapped him in blankets and made hot tea while he sat quietly at the wooden table, staring out at the sea with those remarkable green eyes. She cleaned his wound, relieved to find it looked worse than it was, and bandaged it with practiced efficiency. "Do you remember what happened?" she asked as she worked. "Were you alone on the boat?" He shook his head slowly. "It's all fog. I remember water, cold water, and then nothing until I saw your face. Eleanor had radioed the Coast Guard as soon as she'd gotten him settled. They would arrive within the hour to take him to the mainland hospital, but something in his manner made her reluctant to see him go. It wasn't just his obvious vulnerability, there was something else. A quality she couldn't name that made her want to protect him. "The clothes you're wearing," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "They are well made. Expensive. And this," she held up a gold watch that had somehow survived his ordeal, its face cracked but still ticking. "This is a Rolex." He took the watch with hands that trembled slightly, turning it over to examine the engraving on the back. "JRH," he read aloud. "Those could be my initials. James. John. Joseph. Maybe." But he didn't sound convinced. The sound of a boat engine growing louder interrupted their conversation. Eleanor looked out to see the Coast Guard cutter approaching, its white hull cutting cleanly through the calm water. "They'll take you to Portland," she said. "The hospital there can do a proper examination, and the police can help you figure out who you are." He nodded, but his grip tightened on the watch. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for saving me. The lighthouse saved you. I just pulled you off the rocks." As the Coast Guard crew prepared to transfer him to their boat, he turned back to her. "If I remember anything about who I am, where I came from, may I contact you?" Eleanor found herself nodding before she'd consciously decided. Of course. She watched the boat disappear over the horizon, carrying the mysterious stranger back to the world beyond her island. The lighthouse cottage felt emptier than it had in months. Chapter 4: The Investigation. 3 days passed before Eleanor heard anything more about her mysterious visitor. When the call came, it was from Detective Ray Morrison of the Portland Police Department. "Ms. Marsh, I understand you rescued a man from your island a few days ago. I was hoping I could ask you some questions." "Of course. How is he? Did the doctors find anything?" "That's part of why I'm calling. Physically, he's fine. The head injury was minor, and his memory loss appears to be psychological rather than organic. But we haven't been able to identify him." Eleanor frowned. "What about the watch?" "The initials. The serial number was filed off, and we haven't found any missing persons reports that match his description. No wallet, no ID, no record of a boat registered to anyone with those initials going missing that night. It's as if he appeared out of thin air." "What does he say?" "Still claims to remember nothing before waking up on your rocks. The doctors think the trauma might have triggered selective amnesia, but..." The detective's voice trailed off. "But what?" "Ms. Marsh, I've been doing this for 20 years, and something about this case bothers me. The man's clothes, his dental work, his general appearance, everything suggests wealth, education, sophistication. But there's no trace of him anywhere. No credit cards, no cell phone, nothing. People like that don't just vanish without a trace." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. "Are you saying he's lying?" "I'm saying there's more to this story than we're seeing. And I wanted to warn you, he's been asking about you. About the lighthouse. He seems particularly interested in returning to the island." After hanging up, Eleanor found herself walking to the gallery again, scanning the horizon, as if she expected to see him rowing back across the choppy waters. The detective's words echoed in her mind. Why would someone fake amnesia? What could he possibly want with her isolated lighthouse? As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold, she thought about the stranger's eyes, those impossible green eyes that seemed to hold secrets deeper than the ocean itself. Chapter 5: The Return. 2 weeks later, Eleanor was in the lamp room replacing a burnt-out bulb when she spotted the small motorboat approaching from the southeast. Even at a distance, she recognized the lone figure at the helm. Her pulse quickened as she watched him navigate expertly around the treacherous rocks that surrounded the island. By the time she reached the dock, he was already tying up the boat, a different craft than the Coast Guard cutter, something small and practical that looked rented. He moved with more confidence now. His injury healed, his color restored. "Hello, Eleanor. The police are looking for you," she said without preamble. "You left the hospital without being discharged." He smiled, and she noticed for the first time how the expression transformed his face. "I remembered something." Despite her caution, Eleanor felt a flutter of curiosity. "What?" "My name. It's James Holbrook. And I think I've been here before." The name meant nothing to her, but something in his certainty was compelling. "Here. On Gull's Rest Island." "Not exactly here. But somewhere very much like it. I keep having dreams, fragments of memory. A lighthouse, rocks, a woman with dark hair standing in a doorway." His green eyes met hers. "A woman who looks very much like you." Eleanor felt a strange shiver run down her spine. "I think you should go back to the mainland. To the doctors." "I will," he said. "But first, I need to understand why this place feels so familiar. Why I keep dreaming about it." He paused, studying her face. "May I look around?" "Just for a few minutes." Against her better judgment, Eleanor nodded. There was something in his manner, a gentleness, a sincerity, that made her want to trust him. "The lighthouse is over 100 years old. Maybe you visited as a child, or saw pictures somewhere." They walked up the path together, James pausing frequently to look around with the concentrated expression of someone trying to grasp a half-remembered dream. In the cottage, he stopped in front of an old photograph hanging on the wall. "Who is this?" he asked. Eleanor joined him, looking at the faded black and white image of a stern-faced man in a keeper's uniform. "My great-grandfather, Samuel Marsh. He was the keeper here from 1924 to 1962. James stared at the photograph for a long moment. What was his wife's name? The question was so specific, so unexpected, that Eleanor felt another chill. "Rose. Rose Holbrook Marsh. She died young, in 1943. "Why do you ask?" James turned to look at her, his face pale. "Because I think she might have been my grandmother." Chapter 6: Family Secrets. Eleanor sat across from James at her kitchen table, a showbox full of old photographs and documents between them. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled out a marriage certificate dated June 15, 1923. "Samuel Marsh and Rose Holbrook," she read aloud. "Married in Portland, Maine." James leaned forward, his excitement palpable. "Then we are cousins." "Distant cousins, but still family." "That would explain why you felt drawn to this place," Eleanor said, though something still nagged at her. "But it doesn't explain your amnesia, or why there's no record of your existence." "Maybe it does." James pulled out a letter from the box, its paper yellowed with age. "Look at this." The letter was addressed to Samuel Marsh and dated October 12, 1943. Eleanor recognized her great-grandmother's handwriting from other documents she'd seen. "My dearest Samuel," she read aloud. "The doctors say I don't have much time left. There are things I must tell you, secrets I've carried too long. The baby I lost in 1925, I didn't lose her. I gave her away, to my sister in Boston, because I was too young and frightened to be a mother. Her name was Margaret, and she would be 18 now. I pray she's had a good life, and that someday she might forgive me. I pray you can forgive me too. Your loving wife, Rose." The letter slipped from Eleanor's numb fingers. A daughter. Rose had a daughter. "Margaret Holbrook would have been my grandmother," James said quietly. "Which means Rose was my great-grandmother too." He looked up at Eleanor. "We are not just cousins. We are both her descendants, both connected to this lighthouse in ways we never knew." Eleanor tried to process this revelation, but other questions crowded her mind. "Even if that's true, it doesn't explain why you have no identification, no past that anyone can trace." James was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the edge of Rose's letter. "There are reasons someone might want to disappear," he said finally. "Reasons that have nothing to do with crime or running away. Such as witness protection, corporate espionage, government work." He met her eyes. "I'm starting to remember fragments. Not my name or my life, but feelings. Fear. The sense that I was in danger." Eleanor felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "What kind of danger?" "I don't know yet. But I think that's why I'm here, why I ended up on your rocks that night. Not by accident, but because some part of me knew this was the only place I'd be safe." Chapter 7: The Photographs. That evening, after James had returned to the mainland with promises to come back the next day, Eleanor found herself unable to sleep. She sat in the lamp room, surrounded by the mechanical precision of the rotating beacon, and tried to make sense of everything she'd learned. Rose Holbrook Marsh, her great-grandmother, had been more than just the lighthouse keeper's wife. She'd been a woman with secrets, a mother who'd given up a child and carried the guilt for 20 years. That child, Margaret, had apparently lived and had descendants, one of whom had mysteriously appeared on Eleanor's island with no memory and no past. But there was something else, something that had been nagging at her since James left. She made her way down to the cottage, and pulled out the box of photographs again, spreading them across the table under the bright kitchen light. Most were the usual family pictures spanning decades, lighthouse keepers and their families, visiting relatives, local townspeople. But there was one photograph that had always puzzled her, tucked away at the bottom of the box. She'd assumed it was misfiled, belonging to some other family's collection. It showed a young woman standing on the lighthouse gallery, her dark hair whipping in the wind. She was beautiful in an old-fashioned way, with strong features and intelligent eyes. But it was the man standing beside her that made Eleanor's breath catch. Even allowing for the differences in clothing and hairstyle, even accounting for the decades that separated them, the man in the photograph looked remarkably like James. The same strong jaw, the same penetrating eyes, even the same way of holding his shoulders. Eleanor turned the photograph over. In fading ink, someone had written, "Rose and Thomas, summer 1924. Thomas. Not Samuel." Her mind raced as she pulled out Rose's marriage certificate again. June 15, 1923. But the photograph was dated summer 1924, and Rose was clearly not married to this Thomas. her body language, the way they stood close together, suggested something more intimate than friendship. Eleanor felt a chill as the implications sank in. Had Rose been involved with two men? Was Samuel Marsh, her great-grandfather, not the father of Rose's secret daughter? And if Thomas was the father, if he was somehow related to James, then the connection between them went deeper than either of them had realized. Chapter 8: The Journal. The next morning brought James back to the island earlier than expected. Eleanor met him at the dock with the mysterious photograph in hand. "I found something," she said without preamble, holding out the picture. James took it, his face growing pale as he studied the image. "This man, he looks like you." "Yes." Eleanor watched his reaction carefully. "The back says his name was Thomas. Ring any bells?" James shook his head slowly, but Eleanor noticed his hands were trembling slightly as he held the photograph. "No, but there's something familiar about him. Something that makes me feel." He paused, searching for words. "Sad. Deeply, profoundly sad." They walked back to the cottage in contemplative silence. Eleanor had spent most of the night searching through her great-grandfather's belongings, looking for any mention of this Thomas, or any clue about Rose's secret life. She'd found something, but she wasn't sure she was ready to share it yet. "James," she said as they settled at the kitchen table, "how much do you remember about your life? Really remember, not just fragments and feelings?" "Very little. I know I'm educated, I can read, I understand complex concepts, I speak some French and German. I know I've traveled, because certain places in photographs look familiar. But specifics? Names? Dates, relationships?" He shook his head. "It's like trying to remember a dream." Eleanor made her decision. She went to her bedroom and returned with a leather-bound journal she'd found hidden behind a loose board in the Lighthouse's storage room. "This belonged to my great-grandfather," she said, placing it on the table between them. "I found it last night. I think you need to read it." The journal fell open to an entry dated September 3, 1924. "Rose grows more distant every day. She pretends to love me, goes through the motions of being a wife, but I see the truth in her eyes when she thinks I'm not looking. Her heart belongs to another, has always belonged to another. Thomas Holbrook came to the island today, begging her to leave with him. I watched from the lamp room as they spoke on the rocks below. I couldn't hear their words, but I could see her tears, see the way she reached for him before pulling her hand back. She's carrying his child, not mine. We've barely been married a year, and already our life together is built on lies. But what choice do I have? I love her, even knowing she'll never love me the same way. And the child, innocent of all this adult foolishness. I'll raise it as my own, give it my name, and pray that someday Rose might find it in her heart to be grateful for my discretion." James looked up from the journal, his face stricken. "Thomas Holbrook. The same last name as Rose's maiden name." "Her brother," Eleanor said quietly. "It has to be. She was in love with her own brother's son, her nephew." "Or her brother himself," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The age difference in the photograph isn't that significant." The implications hung heavy in the air between them. Eleanor felt sick thinking about it, but the evidence was undeniable. The family secret that Rose had carried to her grave was darker than either of them had imagined. Chapter 9: The Truth Revealed. James didn't speak for several long minutes after reading the journal entry. He sat staring at the photograph of Rose and Thomas, his face cycling through a range of emotions Eleanor couldn't fully interpret. "There's something else," he said finally. "Something I haven't told you." Eleanor waited, sensing that whatever he was about to reveal would change everything between them. "I didn't lose my memory in the storm," he said quietly. "I remember everything. My name is James Holbrook, I'm 43 years old, and I lived in Boston. I'm a journalist, an investigative reporter specializing in genealogical mysteries and family secrets." The betrayal hit Eleanor like a physical blow. "You've been lying to me this entire time." "Yes." His honesty was brutal in its simplicity. "I came here looking for answers about my family history. My grandmother Margaret told me stories before she died, stories about a lighthouse, a secret birth, a woman named Rose who gave her away. I'd been researching for months, trying to piece together the truth." Eleanor stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "So the storm, the amnesia, washing up on my beach, all of it was an act." "The storm was real. I was caught in it while trying to reach the island, and my boat was destroyed. But I made it to shore on my own, and I've been staying at a bed-and breakfast on the mainland ever since." He paused. "I pretended to have amnesia because I thought it would make you more likely to help me, to share your family's history. And you thought lying was the best approach." Eleanor's voice was sharp with anger. "I thought it was the only approach. Do you think you would have welcomed me if I'd shown up and said, 'Hello, I'm a reporter investigating your family's secrets'?" Eleanor had to admit he had a point, but she was too hurt and angry to concede it. "What do you want, James? What's this really about?" "I want to understand what happened to Rose and Thomas. I want to know why my grandmother was given away, and what became of the man who might have been my great-grandfather." He stood up, moving toward her. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about the story and became about something else. Such as the fact that I've never felt more at peace than I have these past few weeks. Coming to this island, talking with you. Such as the fact that I think I'm falling in love with you." Eleanor turned to face him, searching his eyes for any sign of deception. What she saw there was raw honesty, vulnerability, and something that might have been hope. "How can I trust anything you say now? Because everything I've told you about my feelings, about the way this place affects me, about the connection I feel to you, all of that is true. The only lies were about my identity and my reasons for being here." Chapter 10, The Final Secret. Eleanor wanted to stay angry, wanted to send James away and never see him again. But something in his manner, some quality of desperate sincerity, made her pause. "Prove it," she said finally. "What? You say you remember everything. You say you're a journalist who's been researching this story for months. Then prove it. Tell me something about Rose and Thomas that isn't in these photographs or this journal. Tell me something you could only know if you'd really done the research." James nodded, accepting the challenge. Thomas Holbrook died in 1925, 3 months after Rose gave birth to Margaret. He was found drowned in Boston Harbor. The official cause of death was listed as accidental, but the police suspected suicide. Eleanor felt her anger wavering. This was information she'd never come across, never even thought to look for. "He left a note," James continued, "but it was never made public. I found a copy of it in the police archives. It said, 'I cannot live with what I've done. The child deserves better than a father who loved where he shouldn't have loved.' May God forgive us both. Where he shouldn't have loved, Eleanor repeated. So they were brother and sister. Yes. Rose was 18 when she married Samuel. Thomas was her older brother, 25, who'd been taking care of her since their parents died. The marriage to Samuel was arranged, a way to give Rose security and respectability. But she and Thomas, their relationship, had already crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Eleanor sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the tragedy of it all. That's why she gave the baby away. Margaret was the product of incest. And why Samuel agreed to keep the secret. He genuinely loved Rose, and he understood that revealing the truth would destroy her completely. James sat down across from her. My grandmother Margaret lived a good life. She was adopted by Thomas's sister, given the Holbrook name, never knew the circumstances of her birth. She married, had children, lived to be 92. The secret died with Rose and Samuel. Until you decided to dig it up. Until I decided to understand my family's history, yes. James leaned forward. Eleanor, I know I betrayed your trust, and I know you have every right to hate me. But I need you to know that everything I feel for you is real. This island, this lighthouse, you've become more important to me than any story ever could be. Eleanor looked at him, this man who'd lied to her, and yet somehow made her feel less alone than she had in years. What happens now? That's up to you. I can leave, never come back, publish nothing about what I've learned here. Or what? Or I can stay. I can make this island my home, help you maintain the lighthouse, spend whatever time you'll give me proving that I'm worthy of your trust. He paused. I love you, Eleanor. I know I have no right to say that, given how we met, but it's true. Chapter 11, Redemption. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She walked out to the lighthouse gallery, where the late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. The sea was calm today, its surface barely rippled by the gentle breeze that always seemed to blow around Gull's Rest Island. James followed her, standing quietly beside her, as she gripped the railing and stared out at the horizon. My grandfather used to tell me stories about this place, she said finally. About the ships that found safe harbor because of this light. About the lives that were saved by the work done here. He said the lighthouse was more than just a building, it was a beacon of hope for people lost in the darkness. James remained silent, sensing she needed to work through her thoughts. When I came here 3 years ago, I was the one who was lost. I'd just gone through a terrible divorce, lost my job, felt like my entire life had fallen apart. This lighthouse saved me, gave me purpose again. She turned to look at him. Maybe that's what it's doing for you too. Maybe it is. Eleanor studied his face, looking for any sign of deception, any hint that his words were just another manipulation. What she saw was a man who looked as lost as she'd felt when she first arrived on the island. If you stay, she said slowly, there have to be conditions. Name them. No more lies. Ever? About anything, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. Agreed. You don't publish anything about Rose and Thomas without my permission. Their story, their tragedy, it stays between us unless we both decide otherwise. Agreed. And you have to earn your place here. This isn't a vacation, or a writing retreat. The lighthouse requires constant maintenance, the island is isolated and sometimes dangerous, and the work is harder than you might think. James smiled, and Eleanor realized it was the first completely genuine smile she'd seen from him. "I wouldn't have it any other way." She wanted to trust him, wanted to believe that this impossible situation could somehow work out. But the betrayal was still too fresh, the wounds too raw. "I need time," she said. "You can come back to the island, you can help with the work, but don't expect forgiveness right away. And don't expect anything else." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because I won't be some romantic conquest for you, some prize you win by being persistent. If we are going to have any kind of future together, it has to be because we genuinely care for each other, not because you feel guilty or I feel lonely." James nodded solemnly. "I understand." "And Eleanor?" "What?" "Thank you for giving me a chance I probably don't deserve." Chapter 12, New Beginnings. The seasons changed, and with them, the rhythm of life on Gull's Rest Island. James proved as good as his word, returning every day to help with the endless tasks that kept the lighthouse operational. He painted the exterior trim, repaired storm damage to the dock, learned to operate the beacon mechanism with the same careful precision Eleanor's grandfather had taught her. More importantly, he kept his promise about honesty. When he spoke about his past, his failed marriage, his obsession with work, his loneliness, Eleanor could hear the truth in his voice. When he talked about his feelings for her, there was no manipulation, no calculation, just quiet sincerity. They didn't speak often about Rose and Thomas, but their story hung between them like a bridge, connecting their separate pasts into something shared. Eleanor found herself understanding the tragic couple better than she'd expected. Love didn't always follow convenient rules, didn't always make moral sense. Sometimes it simply was, powerful and destructive and beautiful all at once. One evening in late October, as they watched the sun set from the lighthouse gallery, James broke a comfortable silence. "I've been thinking about what you said, about earning my place here. And I want to make this official. I want to apply to become your assistant keeper." Eleanor turned to look at him, surprised. "The Coast Guard doesn't really do assistant keepers anymore. The lighthouse is mostly automated now. But it still needs maintaining. It still needs someone who cares about its history, its purpose." He paused. "I've been in touch with the Maritime Heritage Foundation. They are looking for someone to help document the lighthouse's history, to create educational programs for visitors." "Visitors?" "Not many. Maybe school groups, maritime history enthusiasts. People who appreciate what places like this represent." He smiled. "I thought we could tell them about Samuel Marsh and his dedication to keeping ships safe. About the storms weathered, the lives saved. The official version of the story." Eleanor found herself smiling back. "And the unofficial version? That stays with us. A secret kept in trust. The way Samuel kept Rose a secret. The metaphor wasn't lost on her. Trust, she was learning, wasn't just about believing someone wouldn't lie to you. It was about believing they would protect the things that mattered to you, would hold your vulnerabilities with care." "James," she said quietly. "Yes? I think I'm ready to forgive you." He didn't respond with words. Instead, he reached for her hand, and she let him take it. They stood together, as the lighthouse beam swept across the darkening sea, two people who'd found each other through deception and stayed together through honesty. Epilogue, 5 years later. Eleanor stood in the lamp room, adjusting the mechanism that would soon be replaced by a fully automated system. The Coast Guard had finally decided that Gull's Rest Light no longer needed a full-time keeper, but the Maritime Heritage Foundation had agreed to maintain it as a historical site. She and James would stay on as caretakers and historical interpreters, living in the cottage, giving tours to the occasional visitor, preserving the lighthouse's legacy for future generations. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life she'd chosen, and she'd never been happier. James appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee, and wearing the paint-stained clothes that had become his uniform over the past 5 years. "The new exhibit is ready," he said, handing her a cup. "Want to see it before the first tour group arrives?" They made their way down to the cottage, where James had created a small museum in what had once been the spare bedroom. Photographs lined the walls, showing the lighthouse through the decades, the keepers and their families, the ships that had found safety in its light. In the center of the room, in a place of honor, hung the marriage certificate of Samuel and Rose Marsh, along with a carefully worded placard that spoke of their dedication to each other and to the lighthouse that had been their home. There was no mention of Thomas, no hint of the tragedy that had shaped their early years together. That story remained where it belonged, in the past, known only to those who needed to know it. "What do you think?" James asked. Eleanor looked around the room, at the careful balance of truth and discretion, history and kindness. "I think Rose would approve." As if summoned by her words, a gust of wind rattled the windows, carrying with it the scent of salt and the cry of gulls. For just a moment, Eleanor could have sworn she felt another presence in the room, a young woman who'd loved unwisely and paid the price, but who'd also loved deeply enough to sacrifice everything for those she cared about. "She's at peace," Eleanor said quietly. "They all are." James nodded, understanding without explanation. He'd learned the language of the lighthouse over the years, learned to listen to its stories and respect its secrets. Outside, the beacon began its nightly rotation, sending its beam across the waters that had brought them together. Ships still passed in the night, still relied on that light to guide them safely home. Some things, Eleanor thought, were worth preserving exactly as they were. The end.